I'm Nancy Fund with DBL Investors. We are a double bottom line venture capital firm in San Francisco. We invest for both financial returns and social returns. And often that social return comes in the form of environmental progress. And we have a very diversified and active portfolio of companies. We're very committed to clean tech. It's not all we do, but it's a big part of what we do. Some of our companies include Solar City, Bright Source Energy, Tesla Motors, and I'm the proud owner of a Model S, which I'll later. Anyway, Primus Power, which is a storage company, OPX Bio, which is making specialty chemicals using biological processes and working to reduce the cost and the carbon footprint of the chemical industry. Those are just a few of the things we do. And I am joined by three very, very accomplished women who will be able to bring different perspectives to the whole commercialization process. And so let me just introduce the three of them. They're going to then spend a couple of minutes talking about their background and what really drives them. And then we're going to get into just more of a discussion, and we'll end up with questions from the audience. So to my immediate right is Rachel Sheinbein. She is with CMEA Capital, which is a very well-respected venture capital firm. She's based in San Francisco. Proud to call you a colleague. We work on a lot of projects together. And she is back to MIT after being away for a few years. She received her master's in, what was it?
Civil engineering and MBA.
MBA and master's in civil engineering from MIT after having studied environmental engineering at Penn. And
like a long time.
Next, Kathleen McGinty, who I'm just meeting for the first time. It's great to meet you. Is right now, she is the Senior Vice President for Weston Solutions and the operating partner at a clean tech PE fund called Element Partners, and a director at NRG, which is, of course, a huge developer of both traditional and renewable energy. Katie was the former secretary at Pennsylvania's Department of Environmental Protection and the chair of the Pennsylvania Energy Development Authority. So, of course, brings huge skills and experience from the public sector to this very important task. Welcome.
Thank you.
And finally, Kristina Johnson is here with us, and known to many of you in the room. Right now, Kristina is the co-founder and CEO of Enduring Energy. And before that was, of course, the Undersecretary of Energy at the Department of Energy, and overseeing a myriad of clean energy initiatives and energy efficiency. So welcome to the three of you. I'm going to go sit at the end there and let Rachel start in terms of your introductory comments.
You just want me to give a little bit of background or specific and talk about the topic?
Just do what you like.
Okay. Okay. What do I want to talk about? Hi, I'm Rachel Sheinbein, and as Nancy said, I'm a partner at a venture capital firm, and so I'm spending a lot of my time right now helping these companies get to the other side of growth and commercialization of their technology. One of the things that's become very apparent to me in this whole idea of moving technical innovation is that, there's a lot of components, the technology as a base, but then you realize that you have to actually usually make something, and then you have to convince people to buy it, and there are all sorts of challenges and things that come up along the way, and different for every company. I'm lucky enough to have companies in 2 in solar, 1 wind, battery, ag, biotech. So I always say I know a little bit about a lot of things and not a lot about anything. And then I just want to put in a plug in my free time, which means nights and weekends. I'm president of the board of Expanding Your Horizons, which encourages girls in STEM. And so hearing Professor Belzer talk about that was just so inspiring, and we have 25,000 girls who go to conferences each year all over the country. 800,000 girls have gone. The organization started the year before I was born in the mid-'70s, and it's really done a lot for encouraging people like me and others to enter into this field and to make a difference. So that's also where I'm spending a lot of my time right now.
Fantastic. Katie.
Okay, thanks. Well, thanks for including me on the panel, and it's wonderful to join this terrific sea of accomplished women, and Ernie was here too, and you too, Ernie. I guess, you know, in terms of what really drives me in innovation and in technology and all the things that so many of you are working on is just solve it, you know, an idea of just solve it. In my years, not only in Pennsylvania, but previously in Washington, chairing the White House Council on Environmental Quality, I've seen so many times issues that should be a molehill become a huge mountain. Why? Because they become polarized, they become theology, they become ideology. And you know what? Sometimes the difference between a complete breakdown on an issue and no progress at all and huge accelerated progress is that somebody has a bright idea, somebody figures out the enterprise, the innovation that changes that problem into an opportunity. In the world of environment, you know, the energy environment nexus is incredibly strong and close. And from my years of experience, if we can innovate around the energy equation, so many of our environmental challenges can be solved. The little ones that we've come to know and work on in conventional pollutants to the really big ones like climate change and loss of biodiversity, et cetera, that come from unsustainable or affected by unsustainable energy systems. Specifically, though, on the topic, how do you go from innovation to the marketplace? I want to toss out four ideas or thoughts or considerations. One is that energy is not software. And in the investment world, this was a big and sometimes not happy revelation over the last couple of years. You mean $10 million doesn't get me an IPO? Nope. It might get you a nice design that you hope will work. So one, capital is really important. Second, because capital is always tough to come by, policy is really important. And I know there was a panel earlier today. Unfortunately, I'm only just joining you now. But it is not the case that energy innovation comes into the market on an even playing field with other energy choices. Why? Because policy over 100 years has built the incumbent energy infrastructure. So even as on a per kilowatt basis, we get to grid parity with renewables, you still need the upfront capital cost. Policy is important to that. Third, building on Rachel's point, we have to have human capital. And I love the fact that you all talked about bringing women and girls into science, technology, engineering, and math. I'll add one other that sometimes gets a stir in some circles. Once that human capital is trained in our great institutions in the United States, we ought to keep those folks in the United States and not say, here's your diploma, now you have to go back home to whatever country you came from. Keeping that talent here, and those are issues we have to care about. Immigration's an issue we have to care about. And the last thing that I would just share in terms of bringing that innovation into the marketplace is sometimes I think we throw up our hands and say, geez, America's not good at manufacturing anymore, we're not competitive. We really can't let that argument stand, because in the work that you're doing, there are cool new pathways to manufacturing, things like 3D printing that take an energy idea into a very cool new energy gizmo, and we can and should do that in the United States.
Fantastic. Thank you, Katie. And we'll come back to those four points later on in the panel. Kristina, you have a couple of 4 slides that you wanted to show.
Right.
Okay.
That's brought up. First of all, I love the remarks of our panelists here. They're great. And I'd like to thank Melanie and the whole MIT team, as well as the DOE colleagues, you know, Bob Marley and Carolyn McGregor and David Sandalow and Marina Sofas, who, you know, a couple years ago pretty much set the tone for this whole event. I think it's fabulous, so thank you all for doing that. You know, the original inspiration, as we've talked about, was empowering women through energy and education, and doing it through 3 ways. One is connecting, communicating, and committing to a clean energy future, and women as a part of that. So one of the things that I envision, this is, we'll get to the innovation in a minute, is that, and we talked earlier today, is there a way we could set up some kind of a, you know, the website exchange center where we could commit to doing 10 things a year to further that energy education, you know, empowerment of women, because I get inspired by hearing everything that our awardees are doing, everybody else in the room is doing, and I'd like to see that, and I'd like to post and say, you know, I made a commitment to do these 10 things, and here are the 10 things that I did, and loved the remarks of the Minister Peters. So, you know, if there's one next step as we go forward, if we can get that communication and collaboration, and Carol and I talked about that a little bit, I think it would be very inspiring, and it would be stimulating to keep things going. Well, I just want to say a few words then as we bring up the slides. We could go, and it's a little bit, I was thinking about it, what are the innovations through the so-called P3 networks, the public-private partnerships? And if we go to the next slide just for a second, you know, I think whether it's in the for-profit or the not-for-profit world, we have the same challenge. And I'm just going to use one slide, so I apologize if we go to the next slide. There's, you know, a lot has been said about the Valley of Death, and I think there's a particular stage where funding is needed, whether it's in a for-profit or a not-for-profit. And this is an example that I actually lived through. There was a discovery made at Harvard in 1975. It's called the ferroelectric liquid crystal. And from 75 to where it got its big commercial push, which was through a movie premiere, which I'll show you in a minute, was 30 years. And so when we talk about, can you go from basic discovery through where it is at scale deployed? And that's where I think we've talked a lot today, is what it's going to take to get clean energy to scale. So you go through the materials discovery, you do a device invention, and then you have some idiot professor like yours truly decides they're going to start a company on the credit card round. How many of us have done that? Take out your credit card and go to the bank and pull out all the money you can, which wasn't a lot at the time. That was, and then you realize, well, that's really not going to work that much. And now you've got this component that took 3 or 4 PhDs to build and hundreds of thousands of dollars, not all on your credit card, of course, at least none on mine. And now you want to get it to scale so everybody can have one at $1 a piece, or it can be given away, right? And that's where I think that green, and it's color-coded green for a reason, is the real critical funding. And that's where you have maybe a few employees that have drunk the Kool-Aid and they believe, but you've got to somehow get it to scale, and you have to go through that hockey stick. And so we used in the 90s a program Department of Commerce put together called the Advanced Technology Program Funding. And that allowed us to develop the processes and the procedures so that we could go from requiring a few PhDs to build and deploy these things until they could be, you know, produced at scale. And we then actually, once we could get a prototype that could be built at scale, because we had the funding to develop the manufacturing process. And I think that's the key. And that process could be manufacturing, it could be logistics, but how do you get your thing that you have to build to scale? And we then made it big in 2005 with the movie Chicken Little. Did anybody see Chicken Little? Yes. Well, those little funny green glasses, those are ours. So we go to the next slide. If you saw, and keep going to the last slide, you know, if you, well, maybe that didn't make the cut, but there was a picture of Avatar. So if you've seen the movie Avatar, you know, our little company grew up to do the R&D for Real D Networks, which ended up going public. Of course, I'd had enough of owning shares in illiquid companies, so I didn't continue to participate at that point. No, it's okay. That's why I'm working for a living. But anyway, it's done well, and it really informed the need for that funding. So when I went to, was in the Department of Energy, we did a program called the Accelerator Program. And our idea was we took $50 million from the stimulus, and we identified 33 companies that needed that $1 million to $2 million to do this process innovation and development. And those companies, our goal was to have companies that had roughly about 10 to 30 employees. We found around 35 companies, and we funded them at a level of 1 to 3 million, with the goal that they'd build their employees from 1,200 to 5,000, and revenues from 1 million to 1 billion. And I think to echo something that Katie said, this isn't going to be done overnight. These are not software companies. But they're on track to do that. I have not checked back in because my ethics agreement expires in about a month. So I cannot talk and find out what's going on. But I think that I did see, by happenstance, one of those companies that we funded, C Micro, just grew up to 80-some employees and was just sold to AMD for $300 million. That was one of the ones. That's job creation that was done through the stimulus program in clean energy. So I guess I would just conclude by saying that I think in all cases where we can invest our funds, whether it's in the public or private sector, is in funding that piece where it allows us to take a good idea to scale. And I'll end with that. Thanks.
Great. Well, we've heard a lot of themes here. The sad truth is that most technologies don't get funded, and so it's very difficult to make those choices, and that's kind of what Rachel and I do for a living. Rachel, you wouldn't have a job if your deals took 10 to 15 years to exit, and that's again the sad truth of our financial system. You need progress faster in order to get pension funds and endowments and foundations to invest in your firm. So how do you navigate that? What are the development steps and the ways of making decisions to navigate that pretty treacherous investment process?
Yeah, so we invest in many different stages, but I think the main thing, right, is how long do we think this is actually going to take to either be sold or go public, and what kind of milestones need to be hit. So it is possible to bring something out of the lab. I'm on the board of Contour Energy, which is a spin out of Caltech, at MIT. I know that's sometimes not the school we talk about here, but and it's a battery technology that when it was first invested in, there was just the professors in a lab, and we brought in the management team. But the decision was, okay, this is far enough along in and we can see how it can be manufactured and maybe in that case fit into existing manufacturing facilities so that we can bring it to market in a time and exit in the time frame that VC. So one thing I would just say is that not every company or product or technology has to be funded by venture capitalists to be successful. There's a lot of different ways to bring technology to market, and not all of them fit in VC timelines, but you can still build incredibly great companies. The other thing is, so sometimes there's a product that we just think is going to take quite a bit longer than we can fund. And so we might get involved in investing in that type of company later on, once the product is already developed and out testing in the field. In fact, the investment that I did with Nancy 2 years ago was a company that had really been in almost an R&D mode and prototyping mode for more than 7 years, and finding that in different ways before we got involved. So sometimes there's companies that we see and we realize, okay, they're not, this is going to be a 10-year thing. We'll keep an eye on this, but maybe in year 6 or 7, and they're funding it through different means, through government grants or angel money, or I've written a lot about strategics and how these big corporations are getting involved in funding innovation. C Micro was also funded by strategics. So where can you look or start selling, or doing licensing? How can you be creative about getting funding in so you can get it to the point and VCs can really come in and give the money to scale and grow? But I'm actually was writing a blog on the way here mentioning some of the Venn diagram of what is overlap between what VCs require, 10 years, at least a 3x return for their portfolio, and energy technologies. The overlap might be small, but there are still things we can fund that can have huge impact. But then there's other ways to fund the rest of it that might not fit into the VC constraint.
Treacherous road, but you're doing a great job, Rachel. Katie, I was interested in your comment about the capital intensity of clean tech, as well as the notion that energy is not software. And let's just talk about that a little bit, and what are the implications in terms of the capital markets engaging around this transition from energy research in the lab to putting companies together. I know that in our portfolio, we have Tesla, which took a lot of money and a fair amount of time to get to an IPO, but did so and is doing quite well. We also had a software company called Pandora. Maybe some of you use the digital music service, which also took a lot of money and even longer time than Tesla took. And so while I, in general, agree that clean tech is capital intensive and it does take longer, it doesn't always, software is not always a slam dunk either. And yet clean tech has a horrible rap on Wall Street as, you know, just being a sinkhole for capital and not creating, you know, no one's enthusiastic about the clean tech companies except maybe for Tesla the way they are about Pandora. And so how do we fix that? Because people want to grow up to work for these kinds of companies and make all that effort. They want to see it be valued and have a payoff.
So let me add to some of the challenge side that you're pointing to and Rachel pointed to as well, but then share a company or two that I think is figuring out a way to move forward. So two additional aspects, I think, of the challenge side. What I've seen is a migration in terms of investment interest in this space from pretty low hurdles. Well, look, if you've got a couple million of recurrent revenue, we at a private equity level, you know, we might take interest in you. Come on in, let's see what you've got. And I do see some retrenchment there. Some of the funds that I'm involved with in the last 2 years have probably gone from a, let's say, 5 million in recurring revenue kind of threshold now to looking for 20 million. So this is really growth stage capital than the early stage. So that, I think, is just in furtherance of what Rachel says in terms of where that overlap is and is it very big. Nancy, I agree with you, and I want to actually contradict myself a little bit on the software piece. But I would say this, where when I use that as a shorthand in terms of energy's not software, there's two things I have in mind with that. You know, one is the capital intensity in terms of developing the technology. But the other is, and this would be an oversimplification too, but in some respects, let's say you're in a relatively long development pathway for a piece of software, the trajectory from the development then to full marketability is about marketing and reaching consumers and that kind of thing, maybe more than in the energy space. Even after you've fully developed your technology, then you're into things like dealing with the likes of myself in my former life. How many permits do I need? Wait a minute, there are endangered turtles there. And so because it is also physical infrastructure of scale, it brings some other challenges. Now, some ideas though. So I'm involved with a company that has technology in the organic light-emitting diode space. And their particular proprietary inks are conductive in two different kinds of applications. So when energy hits them, they emit light. When light hits them, they emit energy. And it's in that latter application, which is more of a solar application, if you will, that the trajectory to proving the technology up for scale level deployment has been a long trajectory. But what they've done is to say, hey, but my technology has some versatility. And in that first application, I can go and knock on the door of major consumer products companies and begin to make money, for example, in the OLED TV space. And so they've been creative around seeing additional applications of their technology. The second example I just share is it's a different play, and it's not cutting edge technology, so to speak, but it is a company that's leading in the development of carbon credits in the California climate market through the destruction of anthropogenic gases. Now, where they're becoming clever is investors are saying, geez, is your whole business model dependent on the climate market? What they're doing now is vertically integrating, and so they're becoming a soup to nuts handler and manager of those anthropogenic gases, not just trying to come into the equation when it's time for the final full destruction of those gases. So they're picking up a much more robust revenue stream in the course of diversifying their business model.
Makes a lot of sense.
Fascinating. What you're talking about is something that happens a lot, is you start with a technology and then you find out that you actually, even the early solar guys like Powerlight, you have to kind of spoon feed your customer and wrap the services around it or do more than just supply the widget. And sometimes that's a challenge for a management team that is very technically oriented and isn't used to all of that. Tell us, Kristina, about that transition. I mean, I loved your graph in terms of the working over the years to get it ready for prime time. But what are the changes in skill sets that are required along the way? And for all the women out here that are thinking of taking their technology and making it commercial, starting a company, what advice do you have in terms of making that work and knowing your strengths and weaknesses?
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, thank you very much for that, because I think the one thing that you said, Katie, was flexibility. So our company was called ColorLink. And originally, it was all about having a single panel and doing color sequential display. So a little bit like back in the days when you had the color wheel, whether it was on your holiday tree or it was doing color TV. It was using electronic means to replace the color wheel. So our competition was a 3-panel projector, which is what everybody has now in the digital world. Well, nobody was really buying our product. I loved our product. But nobody was buying it. And then I realized that we could take apart the component, and if we didn't make it electrical, we actually had better film technology to do the combination of the 3 colors in a 3-panel system. So here I'd gone from competing against these 3-panel systems to realizing I could take the same technology, to your point, redo it so that I could make their systems better. And that was our big break. So we ended up selling millions of what we called the Color Quad to companies like Sony and their Wii 3-panel digital projector. And so it was being flexible and not getting so hung up on what you think your technology will do, but to your point, what it can do to keep you in business. And then we discovered that we could actually do the 3D in a way that was much better than what was the original one back in the 50s, Monsters of the Black Lagoon or something, where they just didn't have very good film technology. So I think it is checking yourself all the time. Is this really, I mean, if the customers are buying this and you're making this, maybe I'd be looking at over there. So
it's being open to your view of the world, perhaps not being the only way, and using that nimble quality to live to fight another day in terms of your original.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we've all seen over the past year or two the politics of clean energy get pretty vicious, and I know that a lot of people are disappointed by that. Katie, you worked for Al Gore when he was a senator. You worked in the Clinton administration. You've been a senior executive of the state of Pennsylvania. You've really seen it all, and and it has changed so drastically in terms of the kind of the early days and the optimism and idealism even, and now we feel like we're often in a battle. But how does that affect the commercialization path?
Well, now, are those bruises and scars so evident?
This is all off the record, right?
Just us and a million of our friends. No, it really is, to me, I think we have been on a path of just a corrosive path. And I try to check myself by asking colleagues and friends who have been involved in policy and politics for the good number of years that I've been involved now. Am I just making this up, or was the level of discourse when I first had the chance to work in the Senate in 1989, was the level of discourse just much more rich and robust? And so far, unfortunately, I have not been corrected in my impression that we went from a time of intense campaigning and then governing to a time of intense campaigning and then campaigning. And we are losing the ability, I think, to see our challenges clearly and to recognize that this is a country that actually has prospered on the basis of facing challenge and overcoming it. I think that there is still a chance in the universe of issues that we face that energy can be an issue that provides some common ground. And the reason I say that is because from one slice of the political spectrum, energy innovations invites an opportunity to solve environmental problems, and green energy is a pathway in that direction. But perhaps at another end of the political spectrum, it similarly offers opportunity in the context of national security and making ourselves more robust in the face of those countries, for example, that might not favor us from a security point of view. So I still think that there is opportunity for common ground, but I think we've lost a lot of that, and Kristina certainly weathered that battle. I did want to, this might be the time for me to use my little prop. Because we do seem to have selective memories or everything becomes politics, I did think it was very interesting in the Wall Street Journal today in a review of a book in the journal that's all about succeeding in innovation, that while in political discourse the government does absolutely nothing right with respect to innovation or job creation of any kind, it seems that when we're not in political discourse and we're recognizing truly successful entrepreneurship, we say things like Mr. Kressel, a physicist, ran RCA Labs in the 1970s when it learned how to manufacture integrated circuits and commercially feasible lasers with Department of Defense funding. That's the example of entrepreneurial success that's held up, and my goodness, the government played a positive role there. In fact, it sounds like it was essential. So I think, unfortunately, we have lost some of that common ground, except for maybe when the political lens isn't looking, and then we say something honest.
One person's incentive is another person's corporate welfare. It just depends on what hat you're wearing. Kristina, in terms of the DOE experience, I mean, so much fantastic work that has been funded through the DOE, and we're benefiting from a tremendous investment over the past decade in clean tech, and yet there is, the landscape has gotten more rocky. How does this affect the individual who's looking to get his or her project funded, and what do you think is the way out in terms of restoring the enthusiasm and the very well-deserved reputation of the DOE? I don't know if you've read the book The New Deal by Michael Grunwald, who writes for Time, but he just goes through the stimulus and spends a lot of time outlining the energy parts of the stimulus and really showing how beneficial that program has been.
Well, it was a wonderful time to be at DOE. I mean, you had the stimulus and all the different areas of clean energy, and we doubled the amount of wind and solar clean energy that's been deployed. And just a couple days ago, the trade press came out on a project. I just wanted to share that we've funded in Tennessee, Chihuahua. Have you ever seen the movie The Fugitive? You know, if Harrison Ford jumps off this dam, that's the Chihuahua Dam. And we funded the upgrade of a hydropower plant from 80 megawatts to 140 megawatts. Made it more efficient, so it uses 100,000 less gallons of water a day, and it went to water cooled from oil cooled, so now it uses 40,000 less gallons of oil. I mean, this is huge impact, 50% upgrade of our hydropower. And those things would not have happened without both the stimulus, which was a competitive grant that funded 7 of those projects in the country, but also the 1603 cashback grant in lieu of tax credit, which moved billions off the sideline, both in public and private partnerships, in order to move the clean energy economy. So it was a great time to be a DOE and to be into clean energy. And I think going forward, I would echo again what Katie said about policy and the importance of policy, because there's an article that was published in February of 2011 by Paul Epstein at the Harvard Medical School, Global and Environmental, Medical School of, what's the name of the center? The Center for I think it's Clean and Global Environment, which shows that the externalities associated with coal-fired generation is would increase the cost by about 3x. So instead of a dime a kilowatt hour, you might be at 30 cents a kilowatt hour. The important thing about that is when people say we shouldn't have subsidies for our energy, I'd say absolutely, we should not have subsidies. We are subsidizing the cost of coal generation in part through our healthcare costs. So if you want a level playing field, we just have to be honest and have a level playing field. And so when I see things like, well, we shouldn't continue the wind production tax credits, I'm not sure we know. And then I think we need to take into account what are these other effects, and it's a little complicated.
Indeed. We could spend a whole another afternoon on that subject, but we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. Do we have some questions?
Hi, Angela Belcher at MIT. Thank you for this panel. I have lots of questions, but I have a feeling I only have time for one. One of the comments was about having students that are not U.S. citizens that are educated here and going back, and that's something I also feel very strongly about because the talent pool is global. But one of the things that I've seen recently, which makes me a little bit more concerned, is that sometimes the students will say, well, my opportunities are so much better in my home country. Look at the package that they're offering me. I was wondering if you have any comments on that. So it goes beyond just being able to offer the ability to stay, but making it as equally attractive to stay here.
Yeah, I would love to further what you are pointing to there, although I'd love to actually have some action to reverse some of those things. One of the things that's on my mind as I shared that comment originally is the comment of a friend of mine who is a environmental engineer and architect from China, PhD at Carnegie Mellon, and his wife, similar background as well, PhD from Carnegie Mellon. And both of them tell a story of, and this number I won't remember exactly correctly, but when you added up the grants both for their tuition and then to support some of their research, it was easily $250,000. And again, at the end of which we said, well, we were very happy to share that with you, and we know that you would really love to stay and build your family here, but you have to go home. And that became a huge problem, especially as the wife of the pair received a position at Purdue. And they have children, and the husband had to go back to China. So also then being separated from his children. The thing that I want to point to that I think is inherent in your question, Angie, is the issue of are we secure in our leadership in R&D even as we wring our hands that maybe we're not so great at manufacturing anymore? And I think we have a certain complacency that we still rule the world in R&D. And I think the numbers are starting to tell a different story, that other countries are investing and they are providing those packages for their best and brightest. And their patent filings now are also telling that story, that we are not way ahead of the curve, and we need to invest and grow or someone else will. We'll lose our position.
Troubling thought. Don't worry, we're gonna end on an upbeat note. You guys are going to give your best piece of advice to the emerging entrepreneurs in the audience. But let's have one more question.
Well, actually, I wanted to kind of piggyback off of what Angela said and propose something positive about the immigration problem in entrepreneurship. And it's happening off of the coast of Silicon Valley. It's international entrepreneurs that are literally buying a cruise ship to be moored in international waters 12 miles off the coast. And they're going to harbor over 3,000 international entrepreneurs and give them access to Silicon Valley venture capitalists and talent pool and actually help them leapfrog over. And so it sounds like an insane solution, but it's because they're trying to address an insane problem. It's backed by Peter Thiel. One way all of us could get involved in this that I think is really interesting, I met with these guys 2 weeks ago. This cruise ship will be powered by diesel fuel all the time. And I was like, not acceptable. So I want to help them put technologies on this cruise ship to make it actually energy independent and powered by renewables. And I think this group actually has the connections and the technology and the relationships to help them do that. So if you want to, you can come find me after. I'm actually on the next panel, so you have to listen to me for a while. But anyways, there are ways to kind of leapfrog this, and I really admire your leadership in the venture capital community, and I hope you support this project.
We saw that project. It's really interesting. They have a lot of talk about permitting issues. Putting a cruise ship outside of Half Moon Bay, but it's so innovative, really. You think you've seen everything, and then something like that shows up. So I wish the project well. All right, so let's end with some upbeat advice for the entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs to be in the audience that have a great technology or idea that want to commercialize it. What would you tell these women? Rachel? Other than that you will write them a check.
Yeah, right. I'll say a couple things. I would, one, say, just because of my personal experience and watching my CEOs, the power of your advisors and the people you put around you who can help answer, just all questions all over the map of what will come up. So the diversity of your advisors as well. Try to find people that complement you, and especially if you can be self-aware of what you either don't like or your weaknesses, and you can bring people together to really complement you as you move forward. I cannot give enough credit to my personal career, as well as watching all the CEOs who have, coaches and put themselves around people who can really help make them successful. And you have to actively engage. It's not a passive relationship. You really have to seek them out and ask the questions. And then I would say the second thing is that it requires a lot of perseverance. And I just think I have the best job in the world, because I work with these incredible entrepreneurs and CEOs who just amaze me. I mean, sometimes they're a big pain in the ass, but they also just amaze me what they go out and do. And everything's against them. I mean, especially in this sector where there's incumbents that have been safely and reliably doing what they've been doing for a very long time. And these entrepreneurs have to, go from the little person looking up and get beat up all the time and have to make changes all the time and be creative and keep going. And so they really inspire me. And so I think that perseverance, it doesn't mean there aren't times to give up. That's a whole nother topic, but or to change at least. But pivot is a nice, try to think. They gave some great examples of thinking through different markets or whatever. But that really, it's challenging, and so it's probably it's like this roller coaster of emotions, but keeping at it even when it feels really crappy, because those times do change. And so I think those are my two things. And I love to talk to. I'm very passionate around increasing women. I'm the only woman at my firm. I'm the only woman on many of my boards, and so I'd like to see more women entrepreneurs and more women to put on my boards. And so I'm rooting for you, and I'd also like to be supportive and be a person who people can come to for advice as well, if I can.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm coming for advice. No, I guess I have two things to say. One is just a big shout out to Melanie. Look around. I mean, this kind of gathering gives me an incredible amount of hope and inspiration for everything that is possible. And I guess my second thought is things aren't only possible, but they're unfolding all around us all of the time. For the challenges that we talked about, they seem genuinely to have inspired an era and a lifetime and an experience of almost daily revolutionary change in one aspect or another. And I think next time what we have to do is overlay some of those long trajectory graphs we have to commercialization with a graph that talks about the absorption of new technologies into commerce and how rapid fire that has become. That penetration of new ideas and innovation into the economy is happening at a pace and at a scale that I think is getting close to Moore's Law in terms of every year far outpacing the year before. And that means that the degrees of freedom in pursuing an idea and finding that place where it's going to get picked up too in that rapid stream of revolutionary change that is happening is increasing too. And you will find your niche and you will find your path to success. And you will find it on your own and in partnership with all the dynamic and wonderful women that are here today.
Terrific. And the last word for Kristina.
You know, everyone here is a leader and an entrepreneur. And someone once said to me that leadership is about a vision. So in terms of an entrepreneur, I'd say the vision is look at a market that's big. And then it's alignment. It's building that team, you know, that Katie and Rachel talked about, that diversity of whether it's investors or people around you. And sources of revenue. I think that's what I heard you say too, is that, you know, don't just think about VC, don't just think about government or angels. But in fact, one of the slides that I slipped through said that, you know, to be successful, you kind of need staying power for about a decade to 12 years. And so at different times of that chain, you're going to need different sort of funding. And I think then it's keep focused on outcomes. So it's vision, it's building a team, it's outcomes, and then make an impact. Think big. Sometimes you have to do the little things, though, in order to get really big. But that would be it.
All right. Well, we're fired up. We're going to change the world. And let's join me in thanking Rachel, Katie, and Kristina.